So the next thing that I wanted to talk about is sailing to a point of land. Um, so this diagram is roughly what I was taught in sailing school. And I think that there is a more common thing, at least maybe in small boat, small race courses. But let's start with this one. So when you have the wind going roughly parallel to a coast, it can try to follow the shape of the coastline. And I think if it's a fairly soft curve, you can get the wind to follow it well. Uh, so what you get out here, further away from the coast, if these are streamlines, so lines of where one particle of air would travel, this is just a straight line here. Um, but if you sail in this way, you can see how with the wind being bent by the shore, you get a little bit of a lift. And as the wind gets bent by this part of the shore, you get even more of a lift and more of a lift and more of a lift as you sail towards the point. Then you tack, turn about 90 degrees here. And then if you look at your angle relative to these streamlines, you actually also get lifted on your way back out. So that's a super valuable if you have a point of land sticking out. The attraction of potentially getting a lift in and a lift out is very high. And then also if there's some, especially if there's some height here, but even in general, when streamlines are closer together, these green lines, that indicates that they are also going fast. The wind would be going faster. There's more pressure. Um, then if you have, but if you miss this, so you sort of say, oh, there's a point over there. I'm going to sail closer to the land because there's a point coming up. It's really important not to go too low because you can get the exact opposite effect. So here you can see the streamlines. I mean, I didn't draw this perfectly. I did try 3 or 4 times, but you can see the streamlines are a bit further apart here. If you imagine that the shoreline is also like a streamline. And here it looks like you start to get headed a little bit because this line is a little bit curved that way. So you get headed in and then you tack turn 90 degrees or so. And then if you look at the angle of these lines closely, you see that you also get headed out. So sailing into a bay is terrible. Headed in, headed out, and less wind. Whereas lifted in, lifted out. So if you're this boat sailing on port towards the shore, tack, right? Just try to approach the point at the point or a little bit below the point. I think a tiny bit to leeward of the point is good. But the reality that I find more often sailing in dinghy courses with maybe more dramatic features, or I'm not sure what it is, but what I see more often is something a bit more like this. You don't get lifted into the point. I could think of Bjornholmen on Fjoset or the big cliff across from Saltis, or yeah, any number of places. You often have this sort of horrible back eddy situation to leeward of the point, and as you sail towards the point, you don't actually get lifted. And so I was racking my brains about how on earth it could be that you don't get lifted, although you do gain from sailing to the point. And this is what Maura and I came up with. And it is that the wind gets sort of funneled or compressed here as it comes off the point, but it doesn't follow the lee side of the point. And also, when wind slows down, it goes turbulent more easily, so it could make sense why this detaches. Anyway, so this boat is in deep trouble. This first one sailed into the no wind area. but just by tacking out and tacking back in, you could come along here. And then this is a decision place. So I tried to draw, I don't know if you can see that line there, that at this point you notice that you've been knocked. So if you're not paying attention to geography, you just tack. Oh, good. And that's not a bad move. You got knocked and you tacked, and you got a little bit of advantage from this shift until you sail back out of it. But if you are trying to sail towards a point, you often have to eat that first shift. So when I'm sailing on Fiosit, I always sail for the second keep sailing until the second big knock. You want to, if there's a airflow separation here, like if you can see the comm patch here, sail like right to the edge of that, or even like a couple centimeters into the comm patch, do a big roll tack, and then the reason is that you gain from being inside the curve here. So this boat is going to be ahead of a boat that tacked like 2 boat lengths earlier. So you definitely don't want to sail into the comm patch, but you want to sail right to the very edge of it, almost too close. So then when you tack, so getting headed is bad unless you get to keep that angle out of the point, which is, I think, the case with a lot of these. So don't necessarily tack on the first header, tack on the second header, and enjoy the extra wind that you get from funneling. And then, so when you tack, the header becomes a lift, and then it should normalize further away from the shore. So in between Malahöjden and Olsten, with Björnholm, there's the mark is way over here, and there's a point, like you're pointing like 200 meters above the mark, and then there's a point where you get this big knock, and then you're pointing straight for the mark. So you have to overshoot it. Yeah, it's not just in the Quergård. There's also a reservoir back in Calgary with hills on all sides, and this has the exact same situation here. Sail towards the point until the second knock, and then tack. So all of these things that we've been doing are nice and mathematical and look really clean, but the reality is usually more messy and more localized. So you can have a wind line and a cat's paw and something else all happening at different parts of the race course, and just because someone in front of you gets lifted doesn't mean that you get lifted. A lot of the time, let's say we have 2 boats on port, and the wind shifts to the right. They should both tack onto starboard. But if the first boat gets into the gust and the second boat doesn't, then the first boat's going to just sail right over top of the first boat. So the windward boat, if we had 2 boats coming on port towards this part of the cat's paw here, and the cat's paw was not advancing significantly down the race course, the windward boat is going to have to decide, do I tack when the other boat tacks to stay in phase with them and miss the gust, or do I actually duck that boat, sail into the gust, and then tack? Usually hipping up, going on the other boat's hip, is slower, but in a situation where the wind is not coming down the course, you might have to dig in because the gust and the shift is only localized. I was using this as the example, but that's probably bad because cat's paws tend to, by their nature, spread out and move on the race course. Maybe I should have used this side, but I think I have a better drawing somewhere else. Accidentally sailing out of the yeah, I think it's further down. Yeah. Bottom right here. If this wind line is not advancing, the windward boat here sails out of it, which can be really frustrating. Usually when this boat tacks, it's nice for you to tack as well, and then you lead, the right boat leads the left boat towards the next feature on the race course. But if the wind line isn't moving, you may have to duck. You may have to duck behind that boat to get into the pressure and out of his wind shadow. Yeah. So here's a common scenario. I don't know how well I've drawn it, but I tried to have no blue pen marks over here as skull and crossbones because there's no wind at all, and then slightly more and more and more darker water on the left. So maybe this is another land on the left, go left situation. But on the calm side, you have occasional big gusts. So it's very common that you could have a riskier side of the race course and then a safer side of the race course. And it just depends venue to venue which side is going to pay off in general. Like you would think that it's always the safe side, but sometimes you can be too safe. And the only way to get up the race course is to time yourself with one of these gusts. But a lot of the time, one side is favored, everyone goes to that side. There's no clean lanes to get that way. And so people talk themselves in, I could make it to that gust. And they sail into a big lull hoping for the gust. Or the gust comes and it doesn't last very long. So just try not to convince yourself, talk yourself out of going to the right direction because of some juicy reward. And then I think I was going to use this as a segue into risk management. I have some more strange wind patterns, so we can talk more about that later. So, risk management. So, reasons to be conservative, reasons to take it easy, also to stay in between your competition and the mark. So if you're just ahead of someone, taking a risk is not necessarily a smart thing to do because you already have the position you want of being ahead. So being slightly ahead of someone could be a good reason. The reason I say just ahead is that if you're way, way ahead, then maybe you can start taking risks again if you think that it's a smart, if you think the risks are smart. And if the risk doesn't pay off, nobody passes you, then it could be a good reason to take the risk. But yeah, so if you're just ahead, be more conservative. Haver, that's not a word. If you have relatively fast boat speed, so if you're faster than the other sailors, just stay with them and you'll pass them. If you take risks when you have fast boat speed, you either end up way ahead or end up just behind. And being just behind is terrible because if you'd stuck with them, you would have passed them on boat speed. So people who have faster boat speed should be more conservative. I had an athlete who was so much faster than the other sailors on the team. I think he didn't learn any strategies. He just had tactics of positioning himself relative to anyone. So this boat in the position number 2 was calling all the tactics. He was just following from in front. The conditions are relatively tame or logical. So if you're trying to stay ahead of someone, it helps that the conditions are reliable. That everything works out nicely. If there are big gusts and shifts, that trying to stay in between your competition and the mark might not work. There might be sudden gusts that let people sail around you. Also, if there's some strange feature on the course, like a land on the right, for example. So you're wondering whether it's worth sailing all the way over to the ley line to get close to land on the right and then come back. You're like, well, if I go all the way to the ley line, I can't cash in on any shifts. So it's a bit risky to go over there. If someone else can do it for you and you can learn from someone else, then you see they're starting to gain, so then you can go to that side. So a good example I had of this was a North American Championships in San Francisco, and it was a fun situation because the radials sailed in the morning and then the standards sailed in the afternoon. So we were the standard sailors were standing on land watching the radial sailors to try to pick up the tactics, and the top sailors were protecting the left because it was shallow on the left, and there was a lot of current coming in. San Francisco is notorious for the current, and so the top sailors, they're fast, so they're conservative. They went a little bit left of everyone and tacked, and then an older guy sailed further left, sailed so far left that he sailed in on the land side of the channel markers, because he was a local. And so the local, they were calling him the local Opti-Dad, was sailing way, way further left, taking big risks, or what other people can perceive to be big risks. And then the top boats just sort of hitched in further and further left and kind of followed that guy from in front. I'll come back for a second, but reasons to take risks if you have relatively low boat speed, for example. So being conservative is not always good. Be careful. If you're too conservative, people start passing you from both sides, or start passing you because they take risks that pay off. You can be conservative until you're at the back of the fleet, and then you have nothing to protect anymore. Also, well, I guess it's sort of the same thing, ending up in the middle of the course. I've been sort of glamorizing it, talking about how you can hit shifts, but generally the middle of the course is terrible. Because you don't get leverage. Remember the big shift versus small shift. And also there's usually dirty air in the middle of the fleet. You can get the feature where gusts don't come all the way across the course, they only hit the sides, or you can get the feature where the wind goes around the race course because there's just a whole bunch of sails in the middle of the race course, and then the edges get a bit of wind and the middle gets nothing. So anyway, the middle can be a terrible place to be, and being conservative, being between your competition and the mark, inherently means you're a little closer to the middle than the other boat. And keep taking the safer and necessary risks. Right. This isn't as much of a cautionary tale, but it's more of a if you stop taking any risks, you'll be passed. So you have to take the clear risks, the really obvious risks, the necessary ones, and you have to take the small risks. You can't sail a race with no risk, which is difficult if you're a stressed sailor. If you sail stressed and then your reaction to being stressed is to take fewer risks, you can sometimes get past. Reasons to take bigger risks. So a lot of these are just going to be the opposite of the previous slide. If you're used to being in a certain position in the fleet and you're further back, you feel like you belong further ahead. That if you passed a group of boats, you could stay ahead of them. Maybe that could be a reason to take bigger risks. If you have relatively slow boat speed, the only way you can compete with people faster than you is by outsmarting them or taking slightly bigger risks. Whoops. Also, if the conditions are wild, like there's local giant gusts and big shifts and sort of like bagging on a heavy air day, you just can't protect against someone getting a sudden 5-knot gust and letting people sail around you. So you have to also keep playing offense, keep taking risks, keep looking for opportunities to pass other boats if the conditions are crazy and dramatic. You can also take risks if a bad result wouldn't hurt you. So For example, this doesn't have to be, so I use the example of being so far ahead that nobody's going to pass you even if the risk doesn't pay off. Also, if you're so far behind that being even further behind doesn't really hurt. But another scenario is you're in the middle of the fleet, but you have a group just ahead of you and nobody really behind you. Like there's a gap behind you. That could be a good opportunity to take some calculated risks. Unless you could just catch them on boat speed. Another situation where a bad result doesn't hurt you, if towards the end of a regatta, you might have made a mental note that there's only a couple people that you could potentially pass, or who could potentially pass you. We talked about that earlier in the presentation. Who is your fleet? If the competition is way ahead or way behind in the standings, then the boats around you aren't important. You could take bigger risks to try to affect the overall standings instead of just get a couple points that don't make a difference. Downfalls of taking big risks. Obviously, you could throw away your lead. Or throw away your lead even in the regatta. Coming back to the beginning of the presentation, you could look like you were way ahead, and then you just keep leveraging out, and then you don't cash in your gains, and so you lose what you had. And another one is just to be aware of. I talked about this earlier. You can try to convince yourself, oh, there's no way of passing these guys. Maybe that's a gust that I could take advantage of, and talk yourself into taking big risks with low probability of a good outcome. You only need to win by a few centimeters. That's an argument for being conservative. You don't need to win by a mile with the big risk and reward situation. So as promised, here are the stranger, the other wind patterns. So we've already talked quite a bit about cat's paws, the wind coming from higher up and spreading out. Here's just an illustration of how you could use the same gust for two different shifts. And then this is a situation that has happened to me more times than I'd like to admit. I'm this boat, and I see the wind on the left. I think, yes, tactical potential for a strategic gain here. And so maybe I eat a couple of shifts. It's not worth tacking on these shifts. I can make it out to this big jackpot over on the left here. And this boat, maybe they don't stay in the middle of the course, but maybe they tack on the biggest of the small shifts. So by the time I've sacrificed my or I've invested in leverage, this boat is a little bit upwind, a little bit ahead. And then I realized that, yeah, there's a wind line here, but actually the wind is also coming in from in front of us. So by the time I get the wind, everyone gets the wind. So the question is, was this unique to just you? Like, are we in this situation on the bottom left? Is the only way to get into that to sail into it, or was this wind just going to come down to the whole race course? You could know that because you've been out on the water for a while, and the whole course gets windy and then dies off, gets windy and then dies off. Maybe it starts on one side, but it goes across the whole fleet. So it could be worth like protecting the left, going a little bit further left than the competition, if that means you get the breeze first. But if the breeze is going to make it all the way across the race course, you don't want to invest too much in getting to that side. The reason I put it into stranger wind patterns is where my mouse is here. I've seen it that there is no wind here. So then this really looks like a wind line from the left, but it just happened to be a coincidence that there was no wind here. And so it's actually a big massive big air mass coming down across the whole course, but the wind didn't show up. And we've already talked about this, but the big question I wanted to highlight here in green is how much is this wind line moving? So you can have wind lines that sort of strangely stay there. I kind of imagine that there's like a large vortex, the wind sort of rotating around in going up, back, down, forwards, up, back. So it can sort of sit there, or you can have a wind line that comes, like we were just talking, comes across the whole course. And so you're going to have to either sail into them if they're not moving, or you could maybe even kind of predict that they're going to move towards you if they are moving. Again, with the stranger wind patterns, you get these funny surface tension. We don't like to talk about them in rule books because they're so weird. Or sorry, rule books, strategy books. But sometimes what you see is not what you see on the water doesn't reflect what's happening in the wind. So this is a drawing of, where is it? This one. So you have a small band of apparently calm water here, and then you have a large bit of apparently calm water here. But this is not what gusts are like. Gusts don't have these like very sharp changes. So if you see a very detailed, strangely shaped gust, the chances are that there's just some sort of fluke of water surface tension, or it could be maybe a difference between very warm and very cold water and air. Or I don't know what the physical explanation is, but every now and then the gusts don't the gusts look different than they actually are. So if the gusts are too strange, like these, especially if you have very dark water right next to very smooth water, it's really worth looking at other boats to watch the other boats as they sail into this apparently calm patch. Do they lean into the boat? Do they bear off? Do they react at all? Or is this just a weird surface tension? So here you can see Axel sailing through the apparently calm water, and he sailed right into this, continuing to hike in this relatively light wind. Another example of something similar is sometimes you get glassy water. It looks like it's totally calm, but there's just like a bubble of still air. And then a motorboat drives along the lake, and behind the motorboat, you get a gust of wind. Well, that's not the motorboat creating a gust of wind. The motorboat stirs up the surface tension, and now the slightly higher, or I don't know, maybe the what's happening is the motorboat stirring the low level wind. But whatever it is, you get a gust visible behind the motorboat. So I just like to question it whenever you see very strange shapes of gusts. Let someone else sail into them. This one is sort of the opposite situation. This is my artistic interpretation of a gust that I saw on Fjoset when there is a relatively high hill to windward of us. It was a southerly, so you get these cat's paws. You also get just like, what on earth is this? And I sailed out of my way to get into it because I wanted an extra gust of wind. But basically, it was just turbulence. It like shook my sail, and I didn't get an acceleration out of it. And then if you're not careful, you can accidentally, especially if you're expecting a gust, you can bear off because you're hiking out too hard and stall. So just be careful when you see something strange like this. And also, again, the same sort of question as with this one: is it worth investing in crossing to the other side of the race course for something like this? To maybe for scale, I think my boat was like as big as the word very. And so I tried to like use it like a cat's paw, and I got a little bit of a lift, but then I just got shaken around and sailed right out of it. So if your gust only lasts 5-10 seconds, it's not worth sacrificing a whole bunch of leverage to get to it, when you could have either stayed ahead of your competition or invested in the next, making your way to the next gust of wind. Another tricky thing to see on the water that we don't get in the east of Sweden so much, maybe in Kalmar, but we don't get in Stockholm, is extreme current, where the more you look at current, you can start to learn what current looks like as opposed to what wind looks like. And that really challenged me for a while, because I like to think of current as just a treadmill. So then what's the difference between wind causing waves and moving water relative to the wind causing waves? And what I've come to is that I think that water that is being moved by the current is more turbulent. So then when the wind hits it, it creates these sharp little dagger things. In Western Canada, at least, or my coach calls them piranha water, because it looks like little piranha fish jumping up out of the water, or not jumping out of the water, but like biting. So if you get these sharp, funny, almost standing waves, little things sticking up, that is probably current. You don't get those sharp ones. You get more sort of like ripples, like scales, like fish scales with normal wind. But these sharp ones could be current, and that would typically be current going upwind, because current against wind creates more apparent wind. If you have current with the wind, it looks sort of oily, like a calm patch. And I think those are harder to tell apart, a calm patch from the wind going downwind. The water going downwind. But when you're sailing upwind, it doesn't really matter that much in current. If you sail into a choppy patch of water, it's either more wind or it's upwind current. Either way, it's good. If you sail into a calm patch, it's either water moving downwind or it's less wind. It doesn't matter. But if you round the windward mark, it's really important to tell them apart. Because if you sail out of your way to get into this choppy water because you think it's more wind, you're now sailing downwind on a treadmill. You're not making the same distance down the course if you sail into current waves. You have this awkward situation sailing downwind where you want to get into current that is pulling you in the right direction, but you don't want to sail into a lull. So that's where that gets tricky, particularly tricky. And that's more in sort of like turbulent current places. Oops. Oh my gosh. Where you get this. It's less of when you have very simple current that's just stronger where it's deeper and less strong where it's shallower, you don't get these effects as dramatically. So my approach, maybe a little bit different than Maura was really putting a lot of emphasis on simplify, and I tend to overcomplicate things. But my approach is to try to think how many different theories explain what's happening right now. So try to almost complicate it as much as possible. What are all the ways that I can think of why that side of the course might be paying off? Because if you just assume that it is a shift, an oscillation, you assume that it's a temporary shift that got people ahead, because you're not really thinking about the shore, and then you realize, oh my gosh, there's actually a bay where the wind is funneling through or something like that. Oh, that's going to happen every upwind. That wasn't a one-time thing. Anyway, so think of all the different theories you can come up with that are consistent with what you're seeing. Eliminate the ones that don't make any sense. I can't be current because I got my coach to take a current measurement and he said there was nothing, or whatever. Then you will have a few different theories that are still possible. What more information would you need to gather to eliminate more theories? So, for example, if you're wondering whether it's wind shear that gave you the advantage or whether it was a wind shift. If you do a speed tuning, um, uh, you're gonna with wind shear, you're going to have either people dropping into each other or being pulled up out of each other's lee. I guess the same thing is also going to happen with a shift, but it will happen more shift by shift. So if you can see the compass numbers changing. Also, if it's wind shear, the people closest to the stronger wind are going to be more affected. And if it's a wind shift, all of the boats affected by the shift should rotate together. Anyway, yeah. Will a split tack tell you the answer? Will that's like Kantana. Will speed tuning tell you the answer? Do you need to get your coach to take some measurements? Can you collect information from the previous fleet? For example, people sometimes there's two races in a row where the right pays off, and people are like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to blindly go right next. Next race. That's should be fair enough, except if you talked to the other fleet and for them the left paid off. And that happens more often than you'd think. The radials come off and say, oh yeah, it was a left all day. And the standards come off and say, well, the further right you went, the better. So then it could be that you had oscillating breeze and the wind was oscillating left for one fleet and oscillating right for the other fleet, as an example. So having complicated everything, I now want to say keep it simple, stupid, the KISS method. Um, uh, Even the sailors who win have incomplete understanding of what happened. So, as a coach, I sit in the coach boat and play around with these theories. And then whenever I have the opportunity, I try to talk to someone who finished well or sailed better than they usually sail, and try to collect information from them and see if their explanation of why they sailed well matches with my theories or contradicts any of my theories. And often the top sailors won't really know what happened. They're like, yeah, I just sort of sailed and tacked when it felt right, and yeah, it was good. It was easy. It was so simple. And then you talk to someone else, and they say, what on earth is going out there? Everything going on out there. Everything I did is wrong. So all that to say, you will not end up fully understanding the race course. So it's okay to have half-baked theories. Even the top sailors have that. So if you don't know what's happening, some sort of fallback plans. Stay in phase with good sailors without covering them. And I think I have a drawing of that later on. I'm using phase differently here. So before I was using the word phase to talk about wind direction. But when I say stay in phase with a sailor, if that sailor is going right, you go right. If that sailor is going left, you go left. So it's a better way of following than being behind them and having dirty air, or being in front of them, giving them dirty air and causing them to turn away from the desired direction. So it's like if you are in a one-on-one battle with someone, yeah, tack on them and force them to sail away. But if you're trying to be conservative and trying to follow someone who's smart, you want the smart person to be making smart decisions so you can follow them the smart way. You don't want to force the smart person to go the wrong way and then wonder whether or not you should follow them the wrong way. I'll go back over that. That might have been a bit confusing. repeat what worked last time. If the right works, go right. Just do it. It doesn't matter why. If you can work out why, then you can make some better moves. But if you're totally confused, you could do worse than just copying what works. Don't get too smart. Get clean air and hike hard. The reason I say hike hard is that a lot of the time when people are doing tactics or when people are thinking, they stop hiking. And then in light wind, it's more like when people are doing tactics, they stall the boat or they stop steering accurately. But yeah, so if you get clean air and focus on boat speed, that's as good or better than catching a couple shifts. This is sort of the same as staying in phase. Copy what works. If it works for them, it's probably going to work for you. And at the end of the day, you only have to beat the other sailors. So this is where the strategy is coming back into tactics. So here, if in doubt, if you want to win the fleet, not the course, use positioning tactics. So protect your side, hurting your competition. So you are boat A. This is coming back to what I wanted to clarify. Let's say you don't know what's going on, and boat B is a decently good sailor. You could tack here and end up here, or you could go closer to them and tack here and end up here. So if you don't know what's going on and you're trying to follow this boat from beside them, tack here. Then you can both sail your own race. But if you tack here, you're forcing that boat to go right. So if you know what's going on, you've worked out, oh, there's wind shear and the left is powerful. You tack here where the dotted boat is, because then you force this boat away from the favored side of the course. It's great. But if you're not sure and you're just trying to follow someone, be generous with their lane. The stupidest thing would be if A is trying to follow B, they tack here, B tacks to clear their lane, even though they wanted to go left, and you tack with them because you're like, oh, the fast boat's going right. You tack with them and start following them to the right, and in the process, pinning them right. Now, by following this boat, you've caused both of you to sail the wrong way. So just if you're trying to follow someone, give them clean air. This one is similar. So you're ahead and you just want to. So I'm talking a lot about following, but the other way of thinking of following is do nothing option. So the least risky thing is just to stay with the fleet until there's something obvious that you can take advantage of, and then you make the gain. But following them or sticking with them or being conservative. So if A is ahead of B here, A has a couple options. A could do the full dark arrow or the dotted line arrow. And again, so the dark arrow is the loose cover, and the dotted line arrow is the tight cover. And nobody's going to stay in this position as B. This boat is definitely going to tack. So if your assignment is to stay ahead of B in a fleet race, you want to give B a loose cover, because if you're going to stay with B, you want B to sail to the correct side of the course with you ahead of them. If you tack here and force them to the wrong side of the course and then start stressing out, oh my gosh, B has so much leverage on me. I think the left's favored, but if we got a big surprise right shift, B could pass me, then you start following B to the wrong side of the course. Again, like I said, not very good. So just giving the boat you're staying in phase with the ability to make good decisions. And so in both those situations, A had the advantage of being ahead of B to start off with. In this case, A is behind B, trying to stay in phase with them. And this is hard to remember. tack to lead. So especially if this boat is a smart sailor, they're sailing on starboard for a reason. So you probably also should be sailing on starboard. This boat wants to go left. So you actually want to be more to the left of that boat. If the advantage is on the left, lead them left. So you're behind them on the race course, but you're the further left than them, so you'll get the advantage before they do. So this can be quite a smart move. So this is the do nothing move. If you're A, if you want to keep the situation with B consistent, you should tack to lead them, tack in phase with them. If you cross behind them, that's a more aggressive move. That's not doing nothing. Not tacking is a bigger move than tacking in this case. Because if you continue on port here, you're leveraging out. You're putting money on the right side of the course. You're saying, I believe that B is going the wrong way. So if you want to go left, tack to lead, because if you go here, and so this boat keeps going straight, you end up here, the slightest left shift, and you start falling into that boat. The exception would be if there is an advantage on the right. In that case, you should hip up. This is going into this position is called hipping up because you're on this boat's hip. Hüfte, I think. If the advantage is on the left, that's why you're on starboard. So why would you go to this side of the boat? You're giving them an even bigger advantage. If the advantage is on the right, why didn't you keep sailing to the right and get more of it? The advantage or the answer could be that you're just trying to minimize risk, and you wanted to just get a little bit of advantage on B by going just a little bit to the right of them. There's always an explanation of why you might want to do something, but the most typical thing to do is to tack to lead, the smartest thing to do. And that is my last slide. Are there any questions, any slides you'd like me to go back to take a look at? Theo.
Well, I have this, what do you call it, an itch, and it might be a mental state that I find myself into, but from time and again, I find myself in, there is a very clear line between two wind directions, and direction is the only thing I can really, experience. That is the difference. And as soon as you cross the line, you are, what do you call it? You are going lower. So
Yeah.
you then you really want to tack immediately.
Yeah.
So you tack, and then you cross the line again, and you're going lower again. So you find yourself like really itching. I need to tack to get on the favored tack, but then it's only a couple of boat lengths until I cross this line, and I will be do you know what
I know exactly.
It might be yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that it's some sort of weird shear of the wind. It's not clear why. Like it has to be explained by 3 dimensions because it's so weird. You've got what is it? Two winds coming towards each other. And there's like a magic line, and you can sail back over it again and again, keeping on tacking on shifts, getting no advantage at all.
No.
So yeah.
So how would one? How would one go about this?
Get away from it. So the problem is that I don't think it's visible. Like when it's happened to me, it hasn't been visible on the water.
No.
So I think you just have to basically you cross it twice and then say, oh, that's a wind shear. And one thing that means is that the boats on the other side of that magical line, you shouldn't pay as much attention to them because they may be just sailing in completely different wind. So because a lot of the time, if you're sailing along and then you see, if you can see my my screen, this boat gets knocked, you might be ready to tack with them. But if there's a wind shear in between you, something weird could happen to this boat and it won't affect you. So if you get that and you sail through it twice and you realize that you got knocked twice with no advantage and you're just going to get sucked into it, you just have to decide which knock you're going to eat and sail away from it. When
Gotcha.
it's happened to me, it's been in the middle of the course where I shouldn't be, and you just have to sort of invest
Yeah,
in
that's
getting away from it.
no, I think that's true for me as well. So yeah, awesome.
Yuri.
Yeah, I'd like your picture on this slide that you're showing, the lower right one.
Yeah.
Like so, because it seems to me, but correct me if I'm wrong, that this leading the way is also very smart, because I mean, either the boat B is going to the left because there is something, or they're waiting for you. And the moment you come close so they can cover you, they will tuck.
Yeah. Yeah.
And no matter what you do, you're losing.
Yeah.
So there is basically nothing in it for you, right? Because if they see, okay, there is something going on and they didn't tuck already, so they will tuck to cover you.
Yeah. If they must be, like, unless they're sailing blindly, they must be going left for a reason, and they either want to be to the left of you while they go right, or they want to be to the left of you, period. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so the other thing about this is that maybe the people on the call haven't done the Argentinian drill too much, but the Argentinian drill is a drill where the people on the outside tack back in so that you don't need as many marks. And what that trains you to do is to sail off to the corner and tack, sail off to the corner and tack. And so if you're not paying attention, the Argentinian drill encourages you to sail the dotted line and hip up on people. So the first instinct should be to tack to lead. I'll just check the chat. I haven't checked to know. Yeah, Victor says that photo I had. Axel found out that it was more wind in the blank area. Yeah, any other questions or slides? Great. Well, thanks for hanging with me. Talked nonstop for a long time. Good work hanging with me, and feel free to ask me questions whenever. As you know, this is my favorite thing to do. Talk about sailing.